Hello there! It's Ma'am Florence for another video lecture in Earth and Life Science. On the previous video, we were able to discuss photosynthesis, where plants make their own food, right? So for today, it's another topic, and let's see what cellular respiration is all about. Okay, so this is the process where organisms use oxygen to break down food molecules to get chemical energy for cell function. So in photosynthesis, plants made their own food, right? And here, the food molecules are broken down to get energy. Also, cellular respiration is catabolic, which means that there is a breakdown from complex substances into simpler ones. And it's also exergonic, so there is a release of energy here. And it's an oxygen requiring process. So we use energy that is extracted from macromolecules such as glucose to produce energy in the form of ATP or adenosine triphosphate and water. So here, I have the chemical equation and let's try to explore it. So again, in chemical equations, we have two sides, right? Two sides. So this here on the left side is our reactant side, or simply the requirements for the process. And on the right side, this is our product side. Okay, so let us look at our reactant side first. So for the requirements of the process, we need the glucose. This is the one that we will break down. So glucose is C6H12O6 plus 6 molecules of oxygen or O2 because it's an oxygen requiring process, right? And then after the reaction happens, we have the following products. So we have 6 molecules of CO2 or carbon dioxide plus 6 molecules of H2O or water and our energy, of course, in the form of ATP. Okay, so again, for the chemical equation, that's C6H12O6 plus 6O2. And after the process, we have the product 6CO2 plus 6H2O plus energy. And I want you to compare the chemical equation for cellular respiration to the chemical equation of photosynthesis. Okay, I want you to look at your notes and try to compare what is there. Okay, are you seeing something like a pattern? So let your teacher know if you figure that out. Okay. So now, it is a process, right? So what kind of organisms does cellular respiration take place? Let's see. Cellular respiration occurs in both plants and animals. So for plants, we know they are autotrophs, meaning they can feed themselves, they are producers, and animals, which includes humans like us, we are heterotrophs, or we are consumers. So we all do this process. And we know that these organisms, we are all made up of cells, right? That's what we've been learning so far. And for these cells, there are organelles inside. So organelles, okay. I think one of the most famous organelle that you know is the mitochondria. So of course, I think it's somehow common knowledge where people say that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, right? So why do we say that? Maybe today we will learn why it is called the powerhouse of the cell. Because the mitochondria is the organelle where cellular respiration takes place. And this is the mitochondria over here. So it has different parts, and as you can see, it is a membrane-bound organelle. So it has an organelle here. It's enclosed in this. Okay, so we have different parts inside. By the way, the membrane, the outer membrane here, the outer membrane is the one that covers our mitochondria, separates it from other organelles. So we have the folds inside. These are called cristae. We have some ribosomes that make proteins, some granules, and the space inside between the folds and our outer membrane, we have the intermembrane space. And innermost part of the mitochondria inside these folds. It's called the matrix. Then we also have some circular DNA. And then we have our inner membrane and some ATP synthase particles. Okay, so these parts play an important role on how the process happens. Right, so on photosynthesis, we were able to discuss this as well. If you remember, I taught you about redox reactions, right? So let's just go over them again so we can refresh our minds, since we will also be using these processes for cellular respiration. Okay, so once again, if we say redox, the keyword here is our electrons. Okay, so for oxidation reaction, it's the loss of electrons or the gain of oxygen. So oxidation, gain of oxygen. And then we have the reduction reaction. This is now the gain of electrons or the loss of oxygen. If you remember, I gave you a mnemonic about this, right? It's Leo Jur, or Leo the lion says Jur. Okay. So moving on, these are the different parts of cellular respiration. So a lot of reactions make up cellular respiration. As you can see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But let's break down the different reactions for cellular respiration. Okay, 4 main parts, and the first one is called glycolysis, or simply the splitting of sugar. So glycolysis. And this one occurs in the cytosol, just outside the mitochondria. So remember, the mitochondria is an organelle, right? It's inside the cell. So the space outside the mitochondria, it's the cytosol. It's part of the cytoplasm. So that's where it starts, okay? It doesn't start inside the mitochondria, but it begins outside. So the sugar will be split outside the mitochondria. And then afterwards, we have our grooming phase or pyruvate oxidation. That's number 2. This is now the migration from cytosol to matrix. So there's a movement. And then third one is called the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle, and this occurs in the mitochondrial matrix. So if you remember, that's the innermost part inside the folds. So that's the mitochondrial matrix. And last, we have the electron transfer chain or ETC in short. And also oxidative phosphorylation. You remember this one? So oxidative phosphorylation, it involves a process called chemiosmosis. And it occurs in the inner mitochondrial membrane. So to refresh ourselves with this part, inner mitochondrial membrane, let's look at our mitochondria again. Okay, so you see over here, this is our inner membrane. This one. Okay, so again, familiarize yourselves with the different parts of the mitochondria because all the reactions will take place in different parts. Right. Okay, so on the last step or the last part of the cellular respiration, oxidative phosphorylation was mentioned, right? So I want to introduce you to phosphorylation. There are actually 2 types. So let us talk about substrate level phosphorylation first. Okay, now we use the term substrate level phosphorylation because ATP, which is our energy, ATP formation in glycolysis is powered by the addition or removal of phosphate groups. Oh, okay. So, if we say phosphorylation, it just means that we are adding or removing phosphate groups to what? To molecules of glucose, which is our substrate. So, that's why it's called the substrate level phosphorylation. Let's take a look at this sample here. Okay, so you see, if we talk about substrate, an enzyme will be present as well because enzymes speed up reactions. So we have the enzyme over here and we have our substrate. So the substrate contains a phosphate group and we will transfer it to ADP, which is adenosine diphosphate. So ADP has 2 phosphate groups since it's adenosine diphosphate. So we will remove the phosphate group from the substrate and we will transfer it here. So because of that, we are now left with ATP. So that's adenosine triphosphate. It has 3 phosphate groups. And then since the substrate is now changed because a phosphate group was removed, we now have our product. So this one over here is an example with the enzyme pyruvate kinase, and we have our substrate PEP. Then we have our ADP here. So after the phosphate group is transferred, we have this ATP and the product is called pyruvate now. Okay? Right. So the next one is called the oxidative phosphorylation. So this is what happens on the last step of cellular respiration. Okay, so how is it different from substrate level? Okay, we use the term oxidative phosphorylation to describe how two molecules of FADH and NADH, which are both electron carriers that are produced in the citric acid cycle or the Krebs cycle, are used to make ATP. So we need these two to make ATP now. And remember, they are electron carriers. So because of that, we use the term oxidative because oxygen accepts an electron while the gradient made by the movement of electrons powers the creation of ATP. So let's look at the sample here. Okay, so our NADH and FADH is over here. Okay, and the electrons are moving because it's an electron transfer chain, right? So they're being transported through different electron carriers. And the last electron acceptor is oxygen. So oxygen plays a very important role rather. That is why it's an oxygen requiring process because that's the role of oxygen. And because of the gradient, ATP will be created. Okay, and I think that will be the last part for this video lecture. You can check the next video so we can start discussing about the first main part of cellular respiration. Once again, we were able to talk about the introduction, like the chemical equation, the breakdown of the processes. We were able to talk about phosphorylation as well. So I'll see you on the next video. Thank you.